Yeah, so I knew that you guys were talking about sort of differentiated instruction that's level and learner appropriate, which is something I think all of us care a lot about. And so I thought I was invited to come talk to you guys tonight. So I thought I'd talk about strategies, and which is a topic that I care a lot about, and that I think has a lot of potential for potential in the second language classroom, regardless of the type of classroom or regardless of the types of learners that you're working with. And I'll just sort of jump in, but and I'm gonna go through some stuff, sort of give some background, and then I'll talk about a synthesis of the literature in this area that I did recently. But I'm happy to stop anytime and talk if you guys have questions or things you want to say. And I think it'll probably go total 20 or 30 minutes or so. But we can discuss as much as you guys want. I'll just keep talking and talking if you don't interrupt me. But feel free to stop me anytime if you want to dive into any of these things in a little bit more depth. Just a sort of a background info on this and the strategies literature, which is vast actually, it's much deeper and richer than I would have expected, but goes back to research that started in the 1970s, and people started in the realm of language learning. We're looking at the good language learner, and the idea behind that was that maybe they could sort of define this, figure out what is this good language learner, like this profile of a great language learner, and then they could sort of mold other learners into the same mold as the good language learner. And that research kind of fell through because as people got into it, they realized, oh wait, and you guys I'm sure know this from my own experience as language teachers and learners, that good language learners or successful language learners, well, being successful really depends on a variety of factors. It depends on aptitude and context and curricular objectives and a number of things, that different factors that interact with each other as well. In the broader field of second language acquisition, the strategies literature fits well within. Have you guys studied much of second language acquisition? Okay, great. So you're familiar with this, and fits within the realm of individual differences like motivation and aptitude and style and personality. But strategies are different. Strategies are different because they're changeable and they're malleable, in that teachers can. This is the idea anyway, is that we can teach strategies to learners to help make them better learners. And that's exactly how and why I got interested in this topic in the first place. That I was teaching Spanish as a second language and English as a second language. And I was curious, I saw my learners, and maybe you guys have seen this before too in your own classes, that I saw the students in my classes not really meeting their full potential. And I saw them, just, for example, studying vocabulary in really rote ways, or ways that I didn't think were as effective as they could have been. And so I tried to get into figure out ways that I could somehow help empower them to make them better language learners. And that's really the whole idea behind strategies and strategy instruction. It's sort of approach to help make learners more autonomous and more effective and efficient in their efforts. So, so a quick definition before going any further. Just we'll define strategies as specific steps taken on the part of language learners to improve their learning or use. And any strategies come to mind? You guys, I say strategies, I think that we're all, generally familiar with what this means, but anything, like any specific strategies come to mind to you guys? Like what would be you can think of like a reading strategy or a writing strategy or a vocab strategy for language learning or for use, just for general usage.
We've been talking about vocabulary games to help students with vocabulary, Luke.
Sure. So making it into a game, or if you think in terms of reading skills, right? So different reading, sometimes skills and strategies. I sort of put this on here. There's some overlap here with some of these terms of skills or strategies, but things like inferencing when reading, or skimming and scanning. Or for writing, if you're teaching a writing class, teaching the class to make, just brainstorm or outline. I mean, these are strategies that a lot of us, we all do these, kind of automatically, but not all learners do those things automatically. They're not always reading a text and engaging in a deep kind of way to make inferences or make predictions about a text. So those are some simple strategies. But just wanted to put a few out there so we're all kind of on the same page. Or for speaking, circumlocution, for example, or guessing at a word, or things like that. Okay. And the big idea, one of the big ideas behind this whole body of research is that we have to make sure that if we're going to teach strategies, and that's sort of what this is all about, for as far as I'm concerned, the idea is that the strategies have to be learner and level appropriate, right? It wouldn't make sense to teach strategies for very advanced skills to learners that were still at a very beginner stage. And so in terms of this broad body of literature, there have been three main questions that have been asked. And I think that these questions range from most theoretical and least interesting to most practical and most interesting. And this is just my view on it, and other people would disagree. But people in this area have talked about, what's the most theoretically sound and appropriate way to categorize them or classify them in taxonomies. Other people have been really concerned with trying to look at relationships between strategies and other individual differences. And then the third different sort of subdomain within the strategies research is this question of, which I think is the most interesting one, is to what extent can we teach strategies to learners to help make them more effective and efficient learners and users of the target language? Okay, and that's really the focus for the few comments I had for you guys today. Has anybody done this, by the way? Has anybody ever purposefully and explicitly taught strategies to their learners? I mean, something that you may have done just sort of automatically, without even really thinking about it. But there's actually a huge body of literature behind it. So if you have been doing it, great, because you've got strong support. And if you haven't, well then I'll just recommend that maybe take these comments into consideration as you are always working on your practice, your teaching practice. So, okay, so yeah, the first question there, strategy classifications. People come up with all these sort of classification schemes. I don't really find this all that interesting, and so I'm not really going to talk about that. I want to keep this as practical and not as theory heavy as possible. And this is just one of those taxonomies, this Oxford 1990s taxonomy of L2 strategies. It's fairly well developed and fairly well accepted by lots of folks. And you can see that it sort of breaks down into, she divides it into direct and indirect strategies, and then within each one of those, a set of subcategories, and then a set of subcategories beneath that. The second big area of research within the strategies literature has to do with relationships between strategies and other individual differences or other learner background variables. And so we can sort of go through these, females tend to use more strategies than males. What do you think? Motivation related to strategies? And if so, how do you think? I mean, so in other words, do you think that more motivated learners would use more or less strategies?
I would say more.
Yeah, probably more, and that's what the research generally says. How about autonomy? More autonomous or independent learners? Yeah, certainly, and that's sort of really intuitive if you think about the fact that strategies, by nature, by definition, really are an autonomous activity, right? There's something that a learner does on their own to help compensate for a lack of proficiency.
And do teaching strategies make a more autonomous learner?
That's a great question. That's the hope. I mean, the hope is that at the very least that we can provide instruction that enables learners to know when and how to use strategies that will help them in different situations. And that's what the studies in this area really try to get at. Mm-hmm. With proficiency, it's a little less clear. We see that at really low levels of proficiency, strategies don't tend to use a lot of low levels of proficiency. Learners don't use too many strategies. As they become a little bit more proficient, they use strategies a little bit more. And then and they get to a high level of proficiency, they don't use as many. But that also makes sense if you think about the fact that an advanced learner wouldn't really need very many strategies because they're already fairly advanced, right? If strategies are meant to compensate for or overcome some of the challenges, advanced learners don't have as many challenges to overcome. Others, other relationships, the cultural background, right? So depending on your educational background or the culture that you grew up in, you might have different beliefs about the way language is best learned and therefore engage in different types of strategies. Same thing there with beliefs, right? If you believe that the way to learn vocabulary, for example, is just by sitting down and drilling it over and over and over, that's probably the type of activity or strategy you're going to engage in. You're going to write out lists of words and just repeat them over and over, that kind of thing. Learning styles and preferences, sure, the general approaches that learners take to learning language, those will impact their strategies. Different tasks, different contexts as well, right? In second versus foreign language environments, learners are going to use different types of strategies. Okay, so on to the third and I think most interesting area in the realm of strategy research is this idea of strategy instruction, which we'll define as explicit training on specific practices or techniques that can be employed autonomously to improve one's L2 learning and or use. It's actually been discussed in loads of studies. I maintain, because this is an area that I'm interested in, I maintain a bibliography on this topic, and it has over 400 articles and book chapters and books. It's been discussed really, really extensively, which I was surprised to learn when I first got into this research a few years ago. And so some support for strategy instruction. I think it has a certain kind of intuitive appeal. The idea that we as teachers, as language teachers, could teach learners strategies to help make them essentially better, more effective, more efficient learners. But it doesn't have just intuitive appeal. There's also theoretical support, underneath it. Idea of, if you guys are familiar with communicative competence, which came out of the early 80s, this sort of move towards a broader understanding of what it means to know a language. More support came for strategies under other movements taking place in broader educational circles related to learner-centeredness, and different other different psychological and educational movements. And SLA, people talk about developmental sequences, and in educational psychology, also this idea of autonomy, or what's been termed self-regulation or self-management. Also popular topics theoretical topics which tie in really nicely to the realm of strategies and strategy instruction. But despite the sort of intuitive appeal and the theoretical support, not everybody would agree. And some people have argued, hey, what we have really little class time. Generally we don't have as much time as we would like to have with our second language learners, and we need to just focus on language and not on anything but language. Not focus on strategy, but focus just on the language. And I get that. There's sort of this cost-benefit ratio concern. The counter argument to that, of course, is though that but by teaching strategies, the time that we do have with our learners is going to be more effective, both in the classroom and then during the time that they have outside the classroom working on their language studies or language use. So we'll try this out just for fun. We'll try this out, okay? I'm going to teach you guys a strategy. This is a fabricated language, or a partially fabricated language. This is one particular vocab strategy called the keyword method. Have you guys ever heard of the keyword method? Okay, so here's what we do. We're going to take the target word. Okay, so let's say we're trying to learn these words here. And we're going to take the target word shash, and we're going to make like some kind of way to link it to the word that we know. Let's all assume this is our L1 over in English. So we're going to make some sort of another word or an image or a sound or something that helps us remember that shash means bear. And we probably, you probably have all done this before. Maybe even done it with your own learners. But what kind of link can we make to help us remember that shash means bear? Like any sort of image or another word in English that would help us remember that shash means bear? Like how about you picture like a bear, and the bear smashes something. Does that work? Okay, how about stew and fish? How can we remember that stew means fish? Any sort of link between those two words?
How about, come on, you guys, fish soup?
Sure, soup.
Okay.
How about sushi?
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
The Suez Canal, maybe there's fish in the Suez Canal. I don't know. I mean, whatever works. There's no right or wrong answer there, really. Whatever helps you make that link. Shal for frog. How about there's a frog in a shallow pond?
Nice.
Does that work? Okay. Mousy for cat.
Sounds like mouse.
Mouse?
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
And lit for smoke.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you light a fire and there's smoke. Does that work? All right, here's the test. Mousy. Lit. Smoke. Sue.
Fish.
Shash.
Bear.
There. Shal.
Frog.
Wow, what do you say, eh?
Did it.
You did it. Nice work. So clearly the keyword method works, right? Well, okay, maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, this is just an example of, you know, how we might do it. And if this is real strategy instruction, we'd go through this a lot more. And ideally, everybody would come up with their own keywords and all that. And the other thing about this was that we were doing, you know, we were using all concrete nouns, which, you know, maybe the keyword is especially appropriate with concrete nouns. It was especially easy to use with concrete nouns, and it might not be as usable or useful with a really long vocabulary list or with a more technical vocabulary list, more academic vocabulary list. I think it definitely could be done, you know. And today, you guys, I think, are talking more about a little bit after I finish up, a little bit more about working with younger learners of different ages. I could certainly see this being useful with children. Coming up with images and other ideas and letting them make up their own ideas and keywords to help link the target word and the L1 word.
Would you use it with adults as well, Luke?
Sure. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it can be a lot of fun. I mean, it's you let people get silly with it, and
it could really lower that effective filter, lower
sure.
that business level.
Yeah.
It could also introduce the concept of teaching strategies for that autonomy, I think.
Sure, most definitely. And student and learners can do this on their own. I mean, once you teach them the strategy, the idea is that they wouldn't depend on you to teach them the keyword, that they would do this on their own independently. You know, rather than just, you know, what a lot of learners do when they have to learn a list of vocabulary words, they just sit down and just write it out 20 times or whatever. One, that sounds horrible. That sounds like a horrible way to spend a night. But two, it's no fun. So I'm not going to be motivated by that. But
I think it comes in lower on the Bloom's taxonomy scale as well.
Right? Yeah, definitely. We want them engaging with it in more meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. If they come up with the keywords on their own, it's going to be more relevant to them personally, right? So, I mean, they could even take it one step further and draw out, if this was the vocab list, make up a whole, and one whole sort of, you know, landscape image that captures all the words and all the ideas. You know, these could all be sort of part of one image, really. You know, so obviously I'm in favor of the strategy stuff. Not everybody has been so enthusiastic. There've been some critiques, right? Some of the studies have had poor designs. Some researchers who've done this, who've taught strategies to test the effects of the strategies, they haven't justified their selection of strategies. We don't know very much about the long-term effects. There's been problems with instrumentation. So anyway, there are some weaknesses. But we have seen, despite those weaknesses, lots of positive effects across different contexts of learners, different types of treatments. I'm not going to go through all this in detail, and different outcomes as well. But then again, we've also seen negative and mixed effects for strategy instruction across the same context, the same types of treatments, the same outcomes. So what do we do with this? How do we make sense of this? How do we, say, Luke, okay, so you're promoting this idea of strategy instruction, but the results seem to be really mixed. And so based on this, because of this condition in the literature, what I decided to do was what's called a meta-analysis. And the meta-analysis is when you bring together in a really systematic, comprehensive way a body of studies, right? So think of it as a type of literature review or a type of synthesis, right, where you systematically bring together all the studies. And in sort of treating literature review as a scientific endeavor as well. And so the two research questions behind this synthesis or this meta-analysis were, overall, how effective is strategy instruction, right? So how effective is this so looking across all the studies that have done this, if we bring together all their results, overall, how effective is it? And then the second question was trying to say, well, okay, however effective it was, is it more or less effective possibly with certain type of learners or contexts or different treatment types or different outcome skills like reading versus writing versus listening versus speaking? So I'll tell you about the study here quickly. I'll skip this, just background on meta-analysis. So I had a set of inclusion criteria. So I searched really exhaustively and thoroughly for these studies that included strategy instruction in some way. And the sample in the end consisted of 77 studies. So 77 studies where the researcher taught a group of learners, or more, in some cases, more than one group of learners, like a class or more than one class of learners, taught them some strategies, some second language learning strategies. So overall, there was 112 unique samples or treatment groups, almost 8,000 individual participants. So this is the idea with meta-analysis. We bring together all the studies on the topic. And then we calculate what's called an effect size. And an effect size is a particular statistic which, if you're not into statistics, but it makes it really easy to compare and combine the results across studies and to interpret that result. I'll talk about that in a second. So results for research question 1, overall, looking across the studies, how effective is strategy instruction? Overall, so that p-value of 0.66. I know that's probably not a familiar statistic to anybody, but that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's like what we might call generally like a medium-sized effect compared to all other studies of L2 research. That's about as effective as any